So today we honor Steve's legacy, but also we look to the future.
Welcome to CBR. Steve Rogers was a pillar of the MCU from Captain America the First Avenger in 2011 to Avengers Endgame in 2019, when he exited the franchise. Today, let's discuss a theory on Captain America either being already dead or soon returning to get a proper death scene.
Try some of that life Tony was telling me to get.
In his last scene, in Avengers Endgame, Rogers had spent his life in an alternate timeline. An old man at that point, he passed on the Captain America mantle to Sam Wilson. Cap was the first character in the MCU to retire from his superhero duties instead of dying on duty. Marvel hasn't given further insight into what exactly happened to Rogers after Endgame. However, since then, there have been some indications that he is dead. When other characters reference Steve Rogers after Endgame, they speak of him in the past tense most of the time. Sam Wilson goes as far as saying explicitly that Steve is gone in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier.
But it's more about the man who propped it up. And he's gone.
And when discussing Steve's legacy, he and Bucky talk about what he would have wanted. During Rogers' absence, many situations have arisen that would have moved him to act or at least give his opinion, such as making John Walker the new Captain America rather than Sam Wilson, who he had personally chosen. Him being silent also indicates he died, but Rogers being currently dead doesn't mean the MCU can't still bring him back and give him a proper death scene. In a flashback or prequel, for example, fans could finally get a glimpse at what Rogers' life was like after returning the Infinity Stones and learn how exactly he died. Another possibility would be a time-traveling or multiversal exploration that could take characters like Sam and Bucky to Rogers, who could be the main version of the character still alive in the past, or a variant from another universe. Traveling to the past could investigate deeper reasons for Rogers to stay in that timeline. He told Sam he wanted to stay with Peggy, but what if there was more to it?
How'd that work out for you? It was beautiful.
The theory that Steve retired entirely after reuniting with Peggy seems odd considering how much he values his duty to protect the world. While Steve handed off his shield and mantle to Sam, there's room to wonder if he was ever able to step away from his role as Captain America up to that point. Returning to a timeline in which there are Cold War tensions and the rise of Hydra, Steve could very well have kept active. As someone who has always cared about the weight of his decisions, Rogers might have sensed a larger purpose in returning to the timeline he helped shape. One compelling theory is that Steve understood the importance of maintaining temporal stability, especially after experiencing the delicate nature of time travel. Having witnessed the multiverse's dangers firsthand, he knew that even the smallest disturbances could ripple through time and space, risking unpredictable fallout. If some disturbance in that timeline could already be felt, Rogers is definitely the kind of hero who would have decided to stay behind in case another massive time travel could rip reality to shreds. Not revealing this to Sam Wilson in Endgame could have simply stemmed from the fact that it did not matter anymore. The threat was already prevented by him staying. Steve would have probably stayed in the past not to live a quieter life, but to be with the love of his life and maintain a vigil over lingering threats from his original era at the same time. For example, he would know S.H.I.E.L.D. is going to be infiltrated by Hydra because he learned about it in Captain America the Winter Soldier. Steve could have decided to stay in the past to see if he could influence a shift in history, but ultimately realized one man alone didn't hold enough power to completely rewrite a timeline. But since the 1940s through the 1970s were historically turbulent, he may have identified even more threats from Hydra, rogue government officials, or early iterations of future villains. He may have been able to stop certain threats that wouldn't undermine the continuity of the main MCU timeline. Him staying back could have also been the consequence of a secret mission given by Nick Fury. Bound to keep it a secret, Steve could have been instructed to not return to his original timeline so quickly so he could face this specific threat. But like he told Sam, he could have chosen to stay with Peggy and not return at all once his job was done. The difference in this scenario is that he would have had more time during the mission to realize what he wants, and the decision to stay would feel less impulsive than it did in Endgame. After having already dealt with all of that throughout a lifetime, Steve would not focus on explaining any of this to Sam once they were finally reunited in Endgame. The same scene in that movie would still make sense. If there was a prequel to show how his life turned out in the timeline he went to, the story could reveal he continued to act as a superhero throughout his life and follow some of his greatest achievements until reaching a climactic death scene, which would have taken place after his talk with Sam in Endgame. This quiet, selfless service would have shaped Steve into the wise older man we got to see at the end of the Infinity Saga.
Feels like it belongs to someone else. That someone else is Steve.
Of course, Marvel making an entire movie just to calm down the fans' curiosity over Roger's life is unlikely, but it does seem viable for the studio to give fans a brief scene that reveals how he died. Since other Avengers like Tony Stark and Natasha Romanoff have had epic death scenes, Marvel could try and correct the lack of closure to Rogers' story. This wrap-up could come in the form of a flashback scene in an upcoming Captain America movie, in which Sam Wilson would recall witnessing his friend die. But an even more exciting option would be revealing Steve Rogers is alive, and Sam, Bucky, and other friends either didn't know he was still alive by design, or they knew and helped him keep his living status a secret. Sam and Bucky could find themselves in need of guidance or want to team up with Steve one last time. No matter his age, Rogers is still a super soldier and could definitely fight alongside them. In this final battle, Marvel would have the perfect opportunity to give the original Captain America the send-off he deserves. Similar to the iconic sacrifices made by Natasha and Tony, this could be Steve Rogers' time to trade his own life for the lives of others. The project in which this happens could also involve John Walker and have Steve's death be a lesson to him about the type of hero Captain America should be. Following a few years of working with the Thunderbolts, US Agent could finally achieve the redemption he longs for through helping Steve in his final moments.
You're my friend.
Whether he saves other heroes or the entire world, Steve's death should be an emotional and powerful farewell, with his friends by his side, and there can be even more narrative consequences for such a death scene. One twist that could change the MCU forever is revealing that, during his time in the past, Steve started a family and has a child or grandchild who inherited his super soldier powers. By showing what his life looked like, or even only showing one scene in which he dies, Marvel can introduce a new character to become the next generation Captain America, someone to take on the mantle after Sam Wilson retires, or to be a part of a team like the Young Avengers, under a different superhero name. Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely, writers of Avengers Endgame, have shared in an interview to The Hollywood Reporter back in 2019 that the idea behind revealing Cap reunited with Peggy did imply there are children who carried on his super soldier DNA. In other universes, like in the 2008 animation Next Avengers Heroes of Tomorrow, Steve Rogers' son is called James Rogers, named after Bucky. In that universe, James is the son of Captain America with Black Widow. He inherited his father's super soldier powers and was raised by Tony Stark. The MCU would not go as far as twisting its own universe completely to fit a similar James Rogers in, but an MCU version of the character could be introduced and stay in the franchise after Steve's long-awaited death scene. Would you like to see Cap's death scene? Let us know how you think it should go in the comments. Until next time, thanks for watching CBR.